Let's get started here by looking at the fundamental building block of a podcast, the audio file. I'll start off by talking in general terms about the audio file resolution to use. You're probably aware that a podcast requires a small file size because the smooth playback of it needs the audio to be as small as possible. Of course, you'd imagine this to be no real problem because you can simply record the podcast audio as an MP3 file. MP3 files being, as we know, around 10% of the size of a 32-bit WAV file, or an AIFF if you are using a Mac. However, there is a quality issue raised if we do record directly to MP3 format. Each time you make an edit or add effects, and then subsequently save an MP3 file, you discard some of the information as it becomes compressed. The MP3 format is a lossy format. That will mean if you reopen it after editing and make further edits and subsequently save it again, then you'll be discarding further sonic fidelity from it. Do this a few times and, in my opinion, you'll get an unusable file owing to the amount of audible compression artifacts introduced. Therefore, I'd suggest you record the initial podcast at as high a fidelity as possible and using a lossy format such as the WAV format or AIFF for Mac. And then, once all the edits required have occurred, then you can convert to MP3 just the once. Consequently, the resulting file will be smaller, but not at the expense of noticeable sonic degradation. An MP3 file that, to the untrained ear, will be much smaller than the typical 11 megabytes per stereo minute of a WAV file recorded at 16-bit and at 44.1 kHz. So that's the reasoning behind setting up either Wavelab or Audition, or indeed whichever audio editor that you use, be it Audacity, SoundForge, GarageBand, Cubase, or whatever. That's the reasoning behind why I set up, in this case, Wavelab, to record the original audio file. So, with all that theory, I'll set up Wavelab here now, but essentially you'd replicate this with whatever audio editor that you use. Owing to the fact that Wavelab is an audio editor, you'll initially have to set it up so that it knows which audio interface to use. If you're a long-time user of Wavelab, you'll no doubt have set this up already, but for new users to the program, you'll need to do the following. I'll start off by looking at Wavelab because it's a little bit more complicated, and then we'll move on and have a look at Adobe's Audition. Now, when I say Wavelab is a little bit more complicated, what I really mean by that is it provides us with many more options. And in fact, that's what we do. We'll come up to the menu at the top here and click on Options, roll down to the second option, VST Audio Connections, and now we'll see this resulting dialog. Now, because I'm recording this screen recording part of this tutorial on my laptop, then you are going to see my options are quite limited. However, regardless of that, you are always going to see these 4 tabs: Playback, Recording, ASIO Plugins, and Options. And right at the top, we can see the audio device. Well, as I say, because I'm recording this for you on my laptop, I only see the basic audio interface settings that come with the laptop. Now, clearly, if this is your only option, then that's what you choose. But ordinarily, if I'm recording clients in the studio, then there would be some further optional choices. Anyway, essentially what you are doing here is choosing the sound card for your particular PC, and related to the sound card, the driver that goes with it. In my case, you can see the audio device is set to Windows ME. Not great, I admit. And if I flick over to the second tab, Recording, then you can see these 2 options. Again, as I said earlier, I wouldn't really be using my laptop if I'm recording clients. Anyway, once you are set up, linked to your particular sound card, then to start the recording process means working with this particular workspace. You don't necessarily have to open up the podcast workspace. In fact, really, I only open up the podcast workspace when I've already got the audio recorded. Instead, all we need to do is further set up by coming down to the record button. Now, I've got it situated here in Wavelab running horizontally across the bottom, but of course you can set this up to be a different position. Look at further Wavelab courses here to see how we do this. Anyway, I'll click on the record button. Once you do, automatically this recording dialog box opens up. Across the top, you're going to see 3 tabs: Method, Options, and Values. Now, to be honest with you, if you are newly starting out with podcasting, I would recommend leaving everything set here to the default. The scope of this course doesn't really afford us time to go through every single setting with you. So as I say, just go for the default values. What I do want to look at though, here under the Method tab, you can see I've got an option here underneath File to Create. Now this is set to temporary file by default, and once you do start recording, then the resulting file will be saved as it's recording to your PC's temporary folder. And then once you click stop to end your recording, then the resulting audio file will open up here within the main audio editor. But there is something I do want to warn you about. Be aware though that if your PC or Mac crashes during a long recording, you'll not get the audio back if you haven't saved it. It will simply get deleted from your temporary folder. Therefore, it's recommended to choose a name and a location. All you need to do is click on here and choose named file. And then now with these two new fields, name and where, well, you can give your file a name and you can inform Wavelab where you want it to be saved. For the moment though, I'm going to go back to temporary file and then I'll run down here to the format. As you can see, by default it's set to stereo, 44.1 and 16-bit. Now in my opinion, you'd be as well to set to a high bit rate, i.e. 32-bit float. And I'm only suggesting this because doing it, you can achieve a wide dynamic range when recording the spoken voice. The spoken voice does have quite a dynamic range. The downside to this, of course, is you will use up more space on your hard drive. Now, I think it goes without saying that when you are recording the spoken word, you only really need to use one microphone, i.e. you'd be recording in mono. And of course, recording in mono will be physically half the file size of a stereo recording. So that's something you probably want to consider, changing this to mono, and in fact clicking on the link here opens up this audio file format. And you can see down here within channels, it's set to stereo at the moment. But here within Wavelab, you can see all the different options available. Now, even though I've just said record in mono if you possibly can to save your hard drive space, clearly to get a good recording of a couple of people speaking, maybe your podcast will include a couple of people talking, then it would be beneficial to set up a stereo microphone. In this case, of course, you would set it to stereo here. As I said a few moments ago, with our sample rate, in my opinion, the bare minimum should be 44.1 kHz, CD quality, remembering that what we are doing is only recording the file at the moment. When we convert it to a podcast later, it's possible we'll be changing all this to get a much reduced file size. So, whilst at the recording stage, use the best quality you possibly can. And as I say, 44.1 in my opinion, because it is CD quality, is the bare minimum, but you can see these further options here. You'll also notice the bit resolution, and as I've said previously, 16-bit again is the minimum. I would tend to use 32-bit float, simply because it gives me a much greater dynamic range. But for our example purposes here, I'll take it back to the default of 16-bit, and hit OK. Moving down slightly to the input area, here is where we set up our microphone and whatever it's connected to. It might be directly connected to your PC, or it might be going through a breakout box, an external sound card in effect. Well, left like this, the default is audio input, hardware, and set like this, you are going to record your microphone. You'll notice there is another option though, playback's output, record what is played back. Now you would choose this option if you require a new recording of what you have playing already within Wavelab. It's probably not something you're going to do when you are podcasting, so we'll take it back to our first option, audio input. And you'll notice whilst we're looking at this method tab, over to the right hand side, we've got quite a number of checkboxes. Now, if I were you, I would leave them all checked, certainly if you are starting off with Wavelab and starting off with podcasting. But you can see textually they kind of speak for themselves what they do. I.e. you can have Wavelab start recording, in fact automatically start, if any microphone sound is detected. Or possibly you might want to auto start at a given time, maybe 5 seconds after beginning recording, 20 seconds or whatever. I'll leave those all for you to explore should you want to include any. But as I say, I would leave them all unchecked, certainly if you are beginning podcasting and using Wavelab. After all, you can always edit out any silences later with the resulting audio file. And then down here, you're going to see this meter. This is the level meter, and at the moment, whilst I'm recording the screen for you, you can see the low quality microphone that's built into my laptop registering here. You can always change this from input to spectrum, should you want to see a frequency readout of the spoken word whilst you are recording. Okay, now I'm going to click on close. I'll leave everything set here as the default. And what I'll do now is I'll flick over to Adobe's Audition to show you what this program offers when we click on the record button as well. Here it is down here. Okay, here we go. We now see this new audio file dialog. And really, we set this up in exactly the same way as I've suggested when we were looking at Wavelab. There aren't as many options here, as you can tell. We're simply restricted to naming the file, the sample rate, how many channels, stereo, mono, etc., and the bit depth. But as soon as you are set, you would click on OK, and this would start the recording process here within Audition. Okay, so those are some of the issues that we have to be aware of, or certainly suggestions rather than issues. And we've looked at how to set up here within Audition and within Wavelab. So I'm going to finish up now, and we'll progress to the next tutorial where I go through the process itself, recording directly into an audio editor.